funds are managed by the Kateřina Šmídková Trust, and special thanks go to the trustees of this fund, which are Roman Horváth, Tomáš Holub, and Milena Horčicová. As for the selection committee, in addition to myself as a chairman of this committee, the other members were Milena Horčicová and Marie Hoerová, the last or the winner of this prize from the last year. So before revealing the name of the winner, I would like to invite President Daniel Minich and Milena Horčicová to present the award to the winner. And before revealing the name, I would like to say a few words to her academic and professional career. So the winner works as a professor at Institute of Economics and Econometrics at the University of Geneva. And since 2013, her academic career has been connected with the University of Geneva. She has also worked as an assistant professor at School of Economics, University of Surrey, and as a postdoctoral research fellow at London School of Economics. From September 2022, she is a visiting professor, Peter B. Keenan Fellow in the International Economics section and the Department of Economics at Princeton University. After graduating from École Centrale Paris and Vienna University of Technology, she obtained a master's degree at the London School of Economics and Political Science and defended her dissertation at the University of Oxford. Her main areas of interest are international trade, political economy, and industrial organization. The winner is considered to be one of the top-rated Czech economists abroad. She has accumulated more than 700 quotations in Google Scholar, and her work is published in the most prestigious academic journals in economics, such as Econometrica, American Economic Review, Journal of the European Economic Association, Economic Journal, Journal of International Economics, and International Economic Review. So allow me to announce the winner of this year's Kateřina Šmídková Prize. And the winner is Monika Mrázová for outstanding scientific achievements. So.
Okay, so thank you very much. Unfortunately, I did not have the privilege to know Kateřina Šmídková personally, but I know her influential work in the field of open economy, macroeconomics, and monetary economics, and it's a great honor to receive this prize which bears her name. When Daniel contacted me a few weeks ago, I obviously did my homework and I learned about the origins of this prize, which is truly inspiring and humbling at the same time. So I hope I will prove to be a worthy recipient. And I hope this will also be an opportunity for me to create closer connections with the economic profession in my home country. Now, if you allow me, I would like to thank a few people who were instrumental in my being here. So first, I would like to thank the late Kateřina Šmídková and the Czech Economic Society for awarding me this prestigious prize. I would like to thank the University of Geneva for providing me with an intellectual home since 2013, and Princeton University for hosting me this year during my sabbatical. Now, on a personal level, I would like to thank my parents, without whom obviously I wouldn't be here. They gave me the basis and motivation for pursuing an academic career. And I'm extremely grateful for the gender-neutral education, which meant that there was never anything I was not supposed to aspire to as a female. I would like to thank my husband, who is doing always more than his fair share. And in particular, right now, he's looking after the children so that I could travel to Prague. I thank my 3 boys, who are very tolerant when mommy comes home late and grumpy because she didn't manage to crack the proof. And finally, I would like to thank the late Peter Neary, my friend and co-author, who taught me what it means to be an academic. And so now, if you allow me, I would like to tell you a little bit about my current research project on which I work with Giovanni Maggi. So in this project, we explore the role for international regulatory agreements. So trade agreements have always been about leveling the playing field between countries. In the past, this was done by removing tariffs, and modern trade agreements try to level the playing field by removing through cooperation on various domestic policies, which create important barriers to trade when they differ across countries, even though they are imposed for legitimate reasons and not protectionist ones. So, for example, car emission standards are not the same in Europe and in the United States, so the same car cannot be easily exported to the 2 markets. Firms have to pay for certification, they have to segregate production and forego the benefits of economies of scale. The costs stemming from regulatory diversity are estimated to be at least 4 times greater than today's tariffs. So regulatory cooperation is the future of trade policy. Yet it is highly controversial. So you may remember the huge protests that swept across Europe in 2016 and 2017 against the newly negotiated trade agreements between the EU and Canada, the CETA agreement, and EU and the United States, the TTIP. And one particular aspect that was very controversial related to these agreements was the question of harmonization of product standards. So as is illustrated by this quote taken from a report by a consortium of NGOs. So as you can see in this quote, these agreements are criticized because they will lead to harmonization of product standards and harmonization leading to more lenient standards, so harmonization to the bottom. And this comes from the fact that big firms push for this harmonization because it serves their interests. Now, the harmonizing role of trade agreements is not always criticized for leading to deregulation. It can also be criticized because it leads to too strict regulation. So that was, for example, the case in the Brexit debate, where the Vote Leave campaign argued that the EU is imposing standards that are too strict, which stifle the productivity of British firms. So whether harmonization is to the top or to the bottom, it seems very controversial in the public debate. Now, the harmonization question hinges on the following key trade-off. On one hand, countries may have different preferences, which leads to regulatory heterogeneity, to diversity. On one hand, regulatory diversity is costly for firms, and this may give an incentive to harmonize. So this may lead to harmony. Now, in this project, we explore how this trade-off plays out both in the non-cooperative and in the cooperative equilibrium. And we focus on one key ingredient, which are the costs of regulatory diversity, which we model as a fixed cost. Okay, so this is illustrated by a quote from former Director General of the WTO, who highlights that the costs of regulatory diversity are usually fixed. Think of firms paying for certification once from time to time. This is not related to the volume traded. So we ask 2 main questions in our project. The first one is, well, what is the role for regulatory agreements? In other words, does non-cooperative behavior lead to diversity being chosen when it would be efficient to harmonize, and vice versa? And then if so, why? And then the second question is a political economy question, where we ask, how does lobbying affect both the non-cooperative and the cooperative outcome? In particular, we are interested in whether we can find any support for the popular critique, which says that big firms push for harmonization because it benefits their interest at the expense of general welfare. Now, the main takeaway of our analysis is that the harmonization role of trade agreements has been probably overemphasized in the public debate for the following reasons. We find that harmony may actually arise non-cooperatively, so countries do not need international cooperation and they do not need to sign agreements to actually harmonize. Now, this non-cooperative harmony may be inefficient, and the role for an agreement might actually be to diversify the product standards. With intra-industry trade agreements may be more likely to play a coordination role. And then we also find that lobbying makes our harmonization more likely, in which case it can lead to lower welfare. So that might be some support for the popular critique. But what we also show is that it's not a problem with the agreement per se, because lobbying will also distort the non-cooperative equilibrium. And so we cannot blame it only on the agreement. For the sake of time, I will skip the related literature and I will go straight to the model. Okay, so the model, we are trying to keep it as simple as possible. So we have two countries, home and foreign labeled with an asterisk. And these are countries, we assume them to be almost perfectly symmetric. So they are symmetric in size and in consumer preferences. We adopt a partial equilibrium approach in which we focus on a single industry, producing a vertically differentiated good in terms of its dirtiness. Okay? Now, we label this dirtiness by E, so the higher E, the more dirty the product is, so the more polluting the car is. Driving the car generates a local negative externality, pollution, okay? And it is worse when the car is dirtier. And consumers are atomistic, and they perceive the same utility regardless of the dirtiness of the car, so their demand depends only on price. Now, it's more costly to produce a cleaner car, so the marginal cost of production are decreasing in the dirtiness of the good. And to keep things simpler, we assume that there are zero trade costs. Now, in the paper, we consider two scenarios, one where there is only one-way trade, so the home country is exporting to foreign, and then another scenario where trade is going both ways. Now, today I won't have time to cover both, so I will only focus on the one-way trade case. Now, to address the consumption externality, home and foreign governments are imposing exact product standards for the goods sold in their respective markets, which we denote by E and E star. Now, we assume that shallow integration has already taken place, so there are no tariffs, no trade taxes, and countries cannot discriminate with their product standards. To model the cost of regulatory heterogeneity, okay, we assume that the firm incurs a fixed cost for each supplied variety. So if the two countries are choosing the same standard, okay, if home standard is equal to the foreign standard, the firm needs to certify the product only once and can sell it in both markets, so it incurs only one fixed cost and when it serves both markets. But if the two standards are different, okay, if home and foreign choose a different standard, then the firm will need to certify for each market separately, and so the firm will incur two fixed costs. Okay. Now, home welfare function can be written as the sum of the following components. So the first one, consumer surplus, which we write in reduced form as a function of the dirtiness of the good. The local consumption externality, also in a reduced form, it is increasing in the dirtiness of the good. And then there is this coefficient alpha, which is very important. This captures the weight that home attaches to the externality. Okay. So the higher alpha, the more environmentally concerned the country is. Now, pi of E and pi of E star are the profits made in the home and foreign markets, respectively. And then the last term is the fixed cost component, where N is the number of supplied varieties. Again, if the two standards are the same, N is equal to 1, the firm is incurring only one fixed cost. If the two standards are different, N is equal to 2, the firm is incurring two fixed costs. Now, to solve for the equilibrium product standards, it is useful to define two additional notions of surplus. Okay, so bear with me, just two more notions of notation. The first one is the home welfare gross of fixed cost. Okay, so the first four terms of the welfare function. And we call the standard that maximizes this welfare gross of fixed cost as home's preferred standard, and we don't denote it by EW. Okay? Then the second notion of surplus is the total surplus gross of fixed cost arising in home. So this is the surplus that only depends on the home standard. And we denote again by ES, E sub S, the standard that maximizes this surplus. Now notice that in this very simple setting, ES is equal to EW because maximizing S is the same as maximizing W. Okay, this will not be the case for the foreign country, but for the home country in this one-way trade case, it's the case. So the foreign country doesn't have any firm, doesn't have any production, it doesn't care about profits, doesn't care about fixed costs, so it only cares about consumer surplus and the externality. Alpha is now the weight that foreign attaches to the externality, which may be different. Alpha star, sorry, is the weight that foreign attaches to the externality, and it may be different from alpha. And for the foreign preferred standard, we denote it by EW star. If we define the parallel notion of the total surplus gross of fixed cost arising, it's in foreign as S star. Now notice that the standard that maximized in this surplus is strictly greater than the preferred standard of foreign. This is because foreign doesn't care about the profits, so it's naturally more stricter than the home country. Okay, so that's all for the setup. And now we are interested to characterize the Nash equilibrium of the following product standard setting game. So it's a simultaneous move where home and foreign are choosing their product standard, their respective product standards to maximize their respective welfare functions. And we are particularly interested in characterizing how the type of equilibrium depends on the following parameters of interest. So on one hand, F, which is the cost of regulatory diversity. So we'll be putting F on the horizontal axis. And then on the other hand, how it depends on alpha and alpha star, and in particular, the difference between alpha and alpha star, because this is kind of a measure of the heterogeneity in the fundamental preferences of the countries. Okay? If alpha and alpha star are equal, the two countries care equally about the externalities, so they have the same kind of same preferences. But when alpha is different from alpha star, then there is preference heterogeneity. Now, to characterize the Nash equilibrium, first we need to derive the policy reaction functions of the two governments. Okay, so how does the home standard depend on the choice of the standard by foreign and vice versa? So for the home country is maximizing its welfare, which is the welfare gross of fixed cost minus the fixed cost component. Now, if the fixed cost was 0, the home country would be choosing its preferred standard EW. But when the fixed cost is non-zero, then the home country may have an incentive to deviate from its preferred standard. So to see this, I'm plotting here the welfare gross of fixed cost as a function of the home standard for a given level of the foreign standard. Okay, so foreign standard is not on the picture, but it's assumed at a given level in the background. Now you can see that the welfare is maximized by definition at EW, so the preferred standard of the home country. But if the preferred standard of the home country is different from the standard chosen by foreign, then home is not getting the maximum value of its welfare. It will be, because it will have to pay an additional fixed cost, so it's getting actually a reduced value at this lower level. And so for that reason, if the foreign standard is within this, what we call the tolerance range highlighted in red, home would actually get a higher welfare by deviating from its preferred standard and by aligning itself on the foreign standard and saving the fixed cost. Okay, so then this translates in this discontinuity in the reaction function. When the foreign standard is far from home's preferred standard, home just prefers to do its preferred standard. When the foreign standard is not too far from home's preferred standard, then home would prefer to deviate from its preferred standard and to adopt the foreign standard. And then again, when the foreign standard gets too far from home's preferred standard, home would just switch to choosing its preferred standard. For the foreign country, things are much simpler because foreign country doesn't have any production. They don't care about profits. They don't care about the fixed cost. So they will be basically choosing their preference standard no matter what the home country is doing. Okay, so the reaction function is just a straight line. So now as we have the two reaction functions, we can put them together and solve for the Nash equilibrium of this standard setting game. And we are mapping the types of Nash equilibria in this space that I told you about, where on the horizontal axis, we have the cost of regulatory heterogeneity. On the vertical axis, we measure the heterogeneity in the country's preferences. So there are basically two types of equilibria. One equilibrium, which is a diversified equilibrium, so labeled div, where each country is choosing their preferred standard and they are different from each other. And then a zone where there would be actually harmony. So the two countries would be imposing the same standard. Now, if the fixed cost is 0, okay, then there is no tolerance range on the reaction function of the home country. There is no reason for home to deviate, because if the fixed cost is 0, they don't need to worry about the fixed cost. Okay, so there is no reason for them to deviate from their preferred standard. So they would always choose their preferred standard. And same for foreign. So when the fixed cost is 0, there is only one point at which the two countries are imposing identical standards, which is when alpha star is equal to this value of alpha hat, such that the two preferred standards are equal. Okay? Now, this happens for a value of alpha star that's strictly below alpha, because as I was saying, because foreign doesn't care about the firm's profits, they are naturally more stricter. So in order to have the same preferred standard, they actually have to care less about the environment than home does. Now, when f is non-zero, then if the distance between the regulatory preferences is relatively large compared to the cost of regulatory heterogeneity, then we will have a diversified equilibrium. So this corresponds to the case when the two reaction functions cross off the diagonal. Okay, each country is choosing their preferred standard. If the distance between the regulatory preferences is relatively small compared to the cost of regulatory heterogeneity, then we have a harmony equilibrium where the home country is adopting the standard imposed by foreign. Okay? So this shows kind of a phenomenon that we initially didn't expect when we started to think about this model, is that you can actually get harmony without any cooperation. Okay? Countries may choose to set the same standards absent of any agreement. And it actually corresponds to a real-world phenomenon that's been labeled in the literature as California or Brussels effect, where countries are adopting stricter standards than their preferred standards, standards from their trading partners. Okay, so our model can account for that. So now I've shown you, in the absence of any cooperation, countries can either diversify or harmonize their standards. So what is the potential role for international regulatory cooperation? Is there any role? Okay, what should a regulatory agreement do? So to think about this, to start, it's good to kind of keep in mind what are the international policy externalities at play here. Okay? So when foreign chooses its standards, it exerts two externalities on the home country. The first one is a baseline externality, whereby when foreign chooses a tighter standard, it increases the marginal costs of production for the home firm, so it reduces the home firm's profits. And then there is this positive matching externality, where for a given standard chosen by home, if foreign decides to match this standard, it will save the fixed cost for the home firm. In this simple one-way trade framework, home doesn't exert any externality on foreign, so it's only the externality from the foreign's choice on home that matter. And because there is this positive matching externality, this may suggest that harmony will be under-provided in the non-cooperative case. And so the agreement should harmonize. But as I will show you, this intuition is actually not quite correct. So to characterize what an agreement would do, what would be efficient in this case, so we solve for the cooperative standards, which maximize the sum of the two countries' welfare, which is equivalent to maximizing the sum of the two surpluses minus the fixed cost component. So the efficient diversified standard would be ES and ES star, and harmonization would be efficient if and only if there is a harmonized standard such that the sum of the surplus, the joint surplus evaluated at the harmonized standard is greater than the individually maximized surpluses minus the fixed cost. Okay, so if this is satisfied, the agreement would select a harmony equilibrium. So if we plot, if we map the types of equilibria in the same space, we get the following picture. And again, there might be diversified equilibria. That's when the distance in the fundamental preferences is relatively large to the cost of regulatory heterogeneity, or a harmony equilibrium where the difference between the fundamental preferences is relatively small compared to the costs of regulatory heterogeneity. Now, I have the picture for the cooperative equilibrium. I've shown you the picture for the non-cooperative. So to deduce what an agreement should actually do, I will superimpose the two pictures, and then I'll tell you what's the role for an international regulatory agreement. So this is what I'm doing here. So you can see there are three potential roles for the agreement. In the orange space labeled H, that's where non-cooperatively countries would choose to diversify, but it's efficient to harmonize. So this is the region where an agreement would actually decide to harmonize standards. In the blue region, labeled D, that's where non-cooperatively countries would choose harmony, but it's not efficient to do so. So the agreement should actually encourage the countries to diversify their standards. And then in the purple region and in the white regions, these are the regions where non-cooperatively countries are selecting the efficient regime. So the agreement would maintain this regime, but would potentially correct the standard levels, which might not be efficient. And so the last point I would like to show you now is how does lobbying affect the whole story? Okay, so what if the governments are subject to pressures from firms? So for this, we assume that the objective function of the home government is the same as before, but now they are putting a higher weight on profits. Okay, the foreign objective function is the same. And so if that happens, if there are political pressures, this pushes down the spontaneous harmony region. The intuition for this is that when home country puts a higher weight on firms' profits, its preferred standard gets more lenient because that's good for the firms. And so home would be willing to harmonize when a foreign is more lenient. How does lobbying affect the agreement? Well, lobbying expands the harmony, the cooperative harmony region. The intuition again is that now we are putting a bigger weight on profits. Firms care about the fixed costs. They don't care about the environment. So there is more incentive to harmonize. Okay. So in this sense, it's true that political pressures can lead for the agreement to choose an inefficient regime, an inefficient harmony regime. Okay? They will never choose inefficiently the diversified regime, but they may choose inefficiently the harmony. And they may even, compared to the Nash, they may inefficiently harmonize. So with respect to the Nash, switch the regime in an inefficient way. Okay? But so there might be some support for the pop critic. But I would like to qualify this statement, and this is the very last thing that I will say. The problem is not really in the agreement, because when you look at what's happening with the non-cooperative setting, in the non-cooperative setting, lobbying also may lead to inefficient spontaneous harmony. Okay, so the lobbying is distorting both the agreement and the non-cooperative. So that's you cannot really blame it on the agreement. The problem is with the lobbying. And so to conclude, harmony may arise non-cooperatively. Cooperation may have different roles. It may promote harmony, it may diversify, it may also maintain the regime and correct the standard levels. It's true that lobbying can lead to inefficient harmonization, which can be bad for welfare, but it's not the agreement per se. The lobbying will do the same, create the same problem in the non-cooperative setting. And then one last point that I didn't have time to talk about because I didn't have time to elaborate on the two-way trade. So with two-way trade, agreements may have an important coordination role, because with two-way trade, there will be multiplicity of equilibria, and so the agreement can serve to choose the efficient equilibrium among many equilibria possible. So that's all that I wanted to show you for today, and thank you very much.
We can allow for one question. We are behind time, so immediately question people. That was Very quick.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a really interesting paper. I just want to ask about the timing of the game, because it seems like you're really looking just at a one-shot simultaneous game. And the question is whether that's a realistic setup. It seems to me that, you know, in the real world, the game is repeated. And then also you might want to consider some kind of leadership structures, because you know, usually the foreign country is the bigger one, so that would be the leader, and the home country is kind of more like a just a price taker or regulatory kind of taker. So have you looked at that, and how would it qualify the results? It seems to me that both of these would lead more towards harmonization. You know, if you have more repetition, it's kind of like a device that helps you to coordinate and harmonize. But yeah, I might be wrong. So.
Well, thank you very much. Excellent question, excellent point. We haven't looked at that yet, but that's our next step. That's on our to-do list. Actually, we would also like to make the model dynamic, okay, so that we can look at and that if you have shocks, environmental shocks or anything like that, what how does it affect the path of adopting different standards? And so it's definitely something we plan to look at, but we haven't done it yet. Thank you.
Okay, and then the last award of the year, of this year's conference, is an award, a prize for long-term contribution to the development of the Czech economic learning. It's a great pleasure that I can do this that time. Let me briefly remind you that the body which decides about this prize is the board of the Czech Economic Society. I would like to thank very much to Sváťa Kapounek, who was coordinator in charge of coordinating the prize. And I will follow the rules Daniel Němec established, that I will announce the name at the end, at the very end. Before, I will tell you about the person, and then we will reveal the secret. Well, some of you know already, because there were some leakages visual. So the prize is awarded by the Czech Economic Society to outstanding representatives of the Czech economic community for long-term contribution to the development of Czech economic learning. And this year's prize is awarded for long-term and versatile support to the development of economics in a scientific way in the Czech Republic. I thought that maybe I should remind past laureates, because people should remember the people who got the prize in the past. So I use my phone, our website, and you can find there that these are the names. Karel Kouba, I will skip all our professors. Karel Kouba, Jan Kmenta, Milan Cojka, Jiří Hlaváček, František Turnovec, Oswald Vašíček, Randy Filer, and Lubomír Mlčoch. The last award was in 2020. So it means that we are not awarding every year. There are still not 10 prizes awarded. So this will be next one. So let me go through the achievements and contribution to the Czech learning. I cannot remember all these things, so I have to read them. So he is visiting professor at CERCI since 1998 and member of executive and supervisory committee there since 2000. So 1998, it's almost quarter of century. The professor is coming to the Czech Republic to teach there game theory courses every year and supervising students and contribute to the learning almost quarter of century. He is one of the world's leading economists, considered the foremost expert in game theory, theoretical industrial organizations, and microeconomics. He is guru of modern game theory and industrial organizations in the Czech Republic, and he contributed to the education and formation of new generations of economists. He is member of Scientific Advisory Board of the Czech Science Foundation since 2019. And before engagement at CERCI, he acted as a professor of economic theory at the University of Bonn in Germany. He was also professionally active at Nuffield College of University of Oxford and at London School of Economics. He acted as visiting professor at Princeton University, New York University, University of California, and I could go on and on. He was member of editorial board of Review of Economic Studies. He acted as an associate editor of Quarterly Journal of Economics and the Journal of Economic Theory. He has papers published in journals everybody knows quite well, such as Econometrica, American Economic Review, Quarterly Journal of Economics, and a Review of Economic Studies. I will stop here, although there are many other things which should be said. I would like to go back to the part about the Czech Republic. So given his expertise, he taught many students who study here, Czechs, Slovaks, and other students at CERCI, and supervised many of them and led them to the graduation, and they are now already successful academic or non-academic graduates from the Charles University. So, this being said, I will finally and officially announce the name of the laureate, which is, if it works, it's Professor Auner Schaket from CERCI. And if everything works well, we will see officially our Professor Auner Schaket on our screen. Still waiting. Auner, be patient. Almost there. Almost. Few touches. Yes. Hello. Hello. And we can even hear you. So, as you know, now it's your time. There is no binding format. You can say whatever you want, whatever you think is important or should be said now. I'm great that you are with us, at least in this way. So the floor is yours, Auner.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm, of course, very grateful to you for giving this prize. I'm delighted and honored, and I regret that I couldn't be there physically, so I have to send only my two-dimensional image. Let me tell you a few things about my relations to Prague, which you have already mentioned. I've been associated with Prague and CERCI for, as you said, about a quarter of a century, visiting here or visiting there as it is, for about a month or 2 months every year. I was appointed as a visiting professor and a member of the supervising committee, the ESC. I must say I immediately fell in love with Prague and Serge. I very much liked the enthusiasm and the energy and the diversity of the young faculty and the administration of Serge. I liked the eagerness to start something new, and the determination to do it properly despite a lot of objective difficulties. I very much like the diversity of the keen students, which arrived from not only from the Czech and the Slovak republics, but from all over Eastern Europe and even part of Asia over time. Now, the supervising committee had many distinguished academics from all over the world, mainly Europe and the USA. and served as, and still serves as, a sober controller of quality in Serge, and a lot of guidance to the young faculty. At times, even micromanaging Serge. Naturally, over the years, the supervising committee has stepped back and let the faculty, which is not that young now, to rule. But still, even now, I think the ESC, the supervising committee, is still a guardian of quality and at times a senior advisor to the faculty. Similarly, in my capacity as a teacher, there was it was evolving over time. In the first years, I was teaching 2 full courses, and gradually reducing my load, letting the excellent local faculty take over. I very much like teaching and supervising students, and so let me say a few personal words about it. What I really like about teaching is that occasionally, not always, when presenting a new concept in class, I can see the eyes of not everybody, but 3, 4, 10 students sometimes lit because they've learned something and they are excited about it. And this I find very rewarding. I must say that well before my academic career, well before starting my academic career as a schoolboy, I was always fascinated and admired the efforts of teachers to try to beat some knowledge and learning into the very often stubborn brains of the school children. I must say, I never wanted myself to be a school teacher. I was dead scared of the rowdy youth. So university was much better, where at least I knew that the students wanted to study. But I wanted, even as a schoolboy, I wanted to understand what it is that makes a teacher a good teacher. And this was independent of the subject. Mathematics, which I liked very much, or in mathematics, a teacher could not be bad because I simply liked the topic and everything was exciting. But in other topics, for example, history, which I liked very much, I could see that the teacher was very knowledgeable, but not a very good teacher. Whereas in a topic like chemistry, which I never liked, the teacher was excellent. So what is it that makes a good teacher? I eventually came to the conclusion that what makes a good teacher is their ability to transcend from the details and the technicalities of the subject and rise to the core and provide a broad overview of the ideas and the development of ideas of the topic and the basic intuition of the topic. I find that this understanding of what is a good teacher has helped me a lot in my academic career. This was certainly important in mathematics, which I later studied. I always thought that it should be that next to the formalities, one should present a verbal intuition which provides a more instinctive understanding of the problem and the solution. This was also doubly used when I moved to economics, where the trend was, and unfortunately sometimes still is, to give either verbal arguments without formal validation of the intuition, or on the other hand, indulge in fancy mathematics, technicalities, and where the result emerges from the mathematics, and therefore, of course, it is obviously true, without providing any suitable human intuition. I hope that in my academic work I reached a healthy mixture of the two. Now, from the height of my advanced age, it is really beautiful to look at the development and the evolution of the ideas in my field. But at the same time, one could see the flaws and the wrong direction which have been taken. And very often the waste of energy and talent on fashionable ideas, which turn out to be not very much, sometimes pointless. Now, this is what I try to give to my students. Next, of course, to the technical abilities. A broad view of the ideas of the topic, shows them the evolution and development of the ideas, and hint at the direction in which the future may go, future ideas or problems may go. But at the same time, which I think is exceedingly important, instill in them some healthy disrespect for the existing theories and the dogmas. Always inquiring and questioning whether what they have been taught, including what I'm teaching, makes any sense at all. Now, I'd like to think that the students in Prague and everywhere else where I taught enjoyed my lectures, and that I managed to instill in them some curiosity about the topic. Now, it seems to me that Serge's success over the years in placing students in academia, in governmental ministries, and in private institutes shows that we have done something right. Now, I'd like to thank you again for your recognition of my efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shaket. And given that you are not here, I cannot give you the blue stuff with the diploma, but I noted there is former director of CERCI, Michal Kejak. So, Michale, please send it to Arne Shaket. And come here. I'm not sure whether the camera is taking us. So here, we are big enough to be seen. So, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michal, for taking it.
No flower. So, we are at the end of all the ceremonies. Do we want? Can we allow for questions? I'm not sure. Jan, we have 5 minutes. Can we then change quickly the setup? Okay. So, I want to stay with us. We'll try collecting questions if there are any in the audience. Scientific, non-scientific. So I will have a question. I should know, because I'm at CERCI only a little bit longer than you when you came there. So would you be able to compare the environment changes of the environment over the quarter of century here? I mean the academic environment. I don't mean outside Prague and the country. Simply academically, both on the side of economists and students.
The faculty has grown, and it was to begin with mostly Czech. Then many more people came. We had some experience with even Americans who came, and now I think there is a healthy diversity of the staff. I'm impressed by the both growth of the number of people and the interaction between them, which is very useful and good. I think this has changed over the years. As to the students, there are problems, of course, which are due to the effect that, to begin with, the Americans were very scared of taking people from universities that they didn't know of, and we have had the best of the Russians, Romanians, or whatever students who came along. And now, of course, the Americans are easily take the best students, and we are struggling to get the best that we can. This has been, it seems to me, the development, the evolution over the years.
Okay, any other question? So I will finish this part of the plenary session. Thank you, Auner, being with us.
Thank you very much.
You can stay online, but we will go to our other event, which is, Jakube, it's our, can you switch? I hope I have it in my presentation. This is the debate, right? The panel debate. If you go on. I don't remember precisely the name. That's why I insisted, Jakub. Yeah. So what follows is a discussion panel, fiscal policy in hard times. And I would like the panelists led by Jan Libich, followed by Helena Horská, Petr Janský, Jan Kubíček, and Jiří Valenta. You see their affiliations to come here and take care of everything, because I'll go and enjoy quiet watching of this important, hopefully important and enjoying event.
Tak čistě to dávám jenom.
Ne, já slajdy nemám.
No, ale já jsem ho... Zbigněk, pojď, jo. Já jsem takhle přepole.
We're waiting for Jan Libich, who is just in time.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm really delighted to be here and chairing the session. I think I'm actually really excited. And the reason I'm excited is because we've got, you know, the world economy and the Czech economy is in pretty big trouble, I think. That's something we can all agree on. And it needs a lot of advice. It needs counseling. And we've got 3 counselors here in this distinguished panel that I'm going to introduce in a moment. So hopefully we'll be able to come up with some really good ideas and good advice about what we can do to improve the health of the Czech economy and especially public finances going forward. Anyway, without further ado, this is the lineup. We've got Helena Horská, who's the chief economist at Raiffeisen Bank, and she's a member of the National Economic Council of the Czech government. We've got Petr Jansky, who's also a member of NERV, and he is affiliated with the Charles University. We've got Jan Kubíček, who's at the Czech Fiscal Council, another councillor here. And by the way, he's also affiliated with this institution, teaching a subject here on fiscal policy. And we've got Jiří Valenta, who's not a councillor, but he's the deputy minister. So I'm sure he can offer plenty of advice on what we can do with fiscal policy going forward. So the plan for today is basically each of the panelists having about 5 minutes to kickstart the discussion, offer their views on kind of short as well as long-term kind of prospects of fiscal policy. And then we'll just open it up. So feel free to write down any questions as challenging as you can make them. You know, but the instruction I was given is do not make it boring, okay? Make it very entertaining, make it engaging, make it interactive. So, you know, hopefully we'll avoid, you know, physical contacts and physical violence, but if we have some confrontation verbally, that's certainly something that's welcome, because that's the only way to kind of move forward and make progress. So I think we're going to start with Helena Horska. If you can please take the floor and tell us about your views on the future of fiscal policy.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for inviting me, and have a good morning. I'm happy to be here at the University of Economics in Prague because it's my alma mater. And yes, the discussion seems to me about the fiscal policy, so I'm not sure if it will be like a joke or the matter of the joke or a matter of the fun. Maybe it would be too serious to have fun or to have joke, but yeah, we can discuss it and just having some comments from the reality. Maybe from the reality there are some ideas about the joking, about what is going on. And if we have so-called fiscal consolidation as a TV series, so we have already maybe the third, fourth round of TV series on the topic of fiscal consolidation going on. So yeah, you might know the situation in the Czech Republic regarding the fiscal position. It's not very well. But if you can have like more wide picture, you can show the other countries from EU and say, hey, it's not so bad if you compare with other EU countries regarding especially the level of public debt. But what makes me sad is the dynamics of the worsening of fiscal position in the Czech Republic. And that is exactly what is going on here. It's not about the level, it's about the dynamics. And you may know that the financial markets, especially FX markets, currency market, is very sensitive to the dynamics. They don't care about the level of interest rates, about the level of fiscal debt. They are just focusing on the dynamics, how fast, how big steps you are going to do with the interest rates, and also regarding the fiscal consolidation. Maybe I shortly mention some key steps or key messages that describing the not healthness, but illness of the Czech fiscal position. The first of all, it's not about the reaction on the current, I'm not saying crisis, I'm using the words the perfect storm, because we are not really in crisis compared to global financial crisis. Everything is working. Problem is that we are facing the perfect storm, blessed or the lights and strong wind is coming from each side. So we are in perfect storm, and fiscal position, of course, should be anti-cyclical. So the problem is not that we have a deficit in our fiscal position. The problem is that we are running the structural deficit for a longer period of time, for many years. For like 5 years ago, the Czech economy was growing by and even above the potential output. So the problem of Czech finance, in my view, is the structural deficit. So we are not financing or we do not have enough finance to cover our so-called legislative driven outlays or expenditures. So we need to change our system to be able to cover the run or the overall or regular government position. So what its problem is that once any crisis or the perfect storm is coming, the Czech fiscal situation is not in a position to reflect such crisis and to use some fiscal reserves. We do not have any fiscal reserves now. So we are not really ready for any other crisis. So once after this perfect crisis will come another one, we will have even a more wide deficit than we are running now. Even the current fiscal incomes are not enough to cover even the expenditures in the case of the health system, the pension system, and also if we would like to invest more, it's also the question of the capacity of the fiscal position. So this is my aware. And if you look on the interest rates, this is another thing that makes me sad, because we have high interest rates because of high inflation. And also because of that, the cost of covering the public debt or the interest rate cost of public debt are rising and will be rising in the future. So we also should count that each year, tens of a billion Czech crown will go to the interest rate cost, and this will again reduce the capacity of the fiscal policy to react on any other economic instability. So in a short, these are the main problems that I see in a Czech fiscal position. So just put in a nutshell, the dynamics of the debt, the problem that we are running huge structural deficit and do not have enough incomes to cope with even the future needed transition or reforms, and the rising interest rate cost because of above average interest rates in the years to come. So thank you.
Excellent. I think let's go with Petr as the second speaker. So as I mentioned, he's at Charles University and also at the National Council.
Thank you. So Jan, you have asked for a confrontation. It's going to be difficult with the great setup of Helena, but let's see. Maybe we'll find something to disagree with down the line. And it's great to be following up on the macroeconomic overview by Helena. So she set the stage for structural deficit, right? And so I'm more on the microeconomic side, so I'll try to discuss some specific things that we also discussed at the National Economic Council of the government, what we could be doing. So maybe there's a saying, maybe in Czech, maybe in English, I don't know, that every crisis is an opportunity. So what that could translate here with the fiscal crisis. So it might mean that if we want to reduce the structural deficit, we might be wanting to reduce the right expenditures and increase the right taxes. And of course, what does right mean, right? So there's the difficult discussions are in there. So one of the things that I think right might mean in this definition is that there are some changes in taxes and expenditures that might make sense to change, even if it was not for the crisis. So that makes very, very nice case. There are indeed some taxes or expenditures, some taxes that should be higher, some expenditures that should be lower, regardless of the fiscal position. So I think now, when else should be the time to make these changes? And of course, then, because we are here economists, then we know that there are some steps that might make the, for example, tax system more efficient or government expenditures fairer. So that should be taken into account too, of course. But I'm wearing the head of a policy advisor here, as I was introduced by Jan, more by an academic, so that it's more hopefully fun and interesting. So let me go quickly through some of the proposals. So some of the tax expenditures that the current Czech government is having might be better if they were not tax expenditures. So one excellent example, and I double checked that with our foremost expert on this, Klára Kalíšková yesterday, is that the tax allowance for non-working spouse we should get rid of that, and that's 4 billion Czech crowns, and it would help the situation of the families and the job market prospects. Similarly, likely with many of the tax expenditures related to the support of financial products, such as the building society savings. So there are more billion Czech crowns there. Then a few other changes that might be worth considering. It's increase in wealth taxation, which is basically non-existent in Czech Republic. Is one of the lowest in Europe and in OECD at about 1%, as I heard yesterday from Libor Dušek, and that's the only wealth tax basically that we have is a real estate taxation that is very low, that is decentralized to the municipalities, and it's going to be very difficult to make the change, but still this is the tax that should rise over the long term. I don't know how much and how fast, but that's an obvious target. Reducing tax exemptions seems to be really what also the Minister of Finance is mentioning. So kind of, I'm really, I'm in the interest of structural deficit. I'm happy to play this game that we're not increasing taxes, meaning we're not increasing tax rates. But if you do get rid of tax exemptions, of course, the tax revenue and the tax quota will increase. So I'm more than happy to look at various tax exemptions in corporate tax rates, etc. And even though the statutory tax rates will not rise, the effective tax rates will, and that's what is ultimately good. So we used to have this discussion about equal taxation of personal income, but from what I see in the numbers, we have very unequal taxation of income, especially with regard to self-employed, who are too often taxed too low. So it's kind of, there's a disparity at that end. So that's something that we might be looking at too. But these are all relatively small changes where you're talking about units or tens of billions of Czech crowns. But the structural deficit is more than 200 billion Czech crowns. So what we can do. So there you have increases in personal income taxation that were reduced by more than 100 billion Czech crowns in December 2020. So that's something that economists and politicians are looking at. And the other big elephant in the room is the pension system. Because it seems to me that now we're talking about big structural deficit, but maybe when we meet here in 20, 40 years, if there are no policy changes to the status quo, the structural deficit would be in that scenario much bigger. So I guess the previous generations did not really come up with a proper reform of pension system. So what we are left now with is the adjustment of the parameters of the system. And still, kind of, if you increase retirement age, increase social security contributions, decrease pensions, decrease indexation pensions, these have huge fiscal consequences. I know these are not necessarily desirable steps, but these are the tools. If you do want to do fiscal consolidation, this is the way to go. So you wanted a confrontation. So now let me provide you a confrontation. I provided some policy recommendations now, but now let's confront it with the reality. And there's a big clash between what policymakers, or not policymakers, policy advisors such as Helena are saying and what the politicians are doing. And I do understand the reality. I'm following it. So if you look at what's been happening, the current government, the previous government, we see that the pensions are going extremely up, for example. So there's been, extraordinarily indexation of pensions. There's this bringing up výchovné, extra money in pensions. And you also see not taxes increasing, but taxes in fact decreasing. It's abolishment or pause of some road taxes, real estate transactions. We just phased out the online cash registers. So many of the changes that have been made are going in the wrong direction. So looking forward to discussion. I'll continue to be contributing to this debate, hopefully, if I don't burn out, by providing evidence. So if you want to see some of my research on corporate taxation, come to the session after this one. I'll try to provide policy advice to the government, which is basically, evidence-based policy making, what I've just been discussing and we'll be discussing here today. But also what I think is very important that I don't do very well, but I think is very important is the co-creating narratives. Is that seems to be influencing the policy outcomes a lot, but maybe economists, including me, are not paying much attention to that. So let's do that together.
Excellent. Thank you, Petr. Our next panelist is Jan Kubíček from the National Budgetary Council.
Thank you. Okay, so I prepared rather questions than saying what to do. Okay, my predecessors have already said that the situation is not very optimistic, but we have to distinguish between long-term sustainability and fiscal consolidation. I guess today we are talking about fiscal consolidation, not long-term sustainability. The Czech public finance is not sustainable, has not been sustainable for several years. It was not sustainable 5 years ago. It's not sustainable today. But the long-term sustainability cannot be reached without pension reform, deep pension reform. So I guess this is a special topic. So let's focus on fiscal consolidation today. So I looked at various proposals by the National Economic Council of the government, but there are other proposals, for example, by Czech Priorities, which is a think tank. There are proposals by private banks. What is interesting, we can go through the proposals one by one, but what I find interesting is that the proposals seem not to stem from political parties. That is, why is that so? The political parties seem to wait for proposals, to pick from proposals, but is that a new normal? Is that a normal situation? Isn't it a failure of the of the political scene? Well, it may be advantageous in some respect because the think tanks perhaps have, well, they are not political, perhaps, so maybe their proposals are better, but I think it's not tenable in the long term. So this is, perhaps my colleague will respond to this. Why is that so? Maybe there is some asymmetry. Perhaps the proposals, if they reduce taxes and increase expenditures, then they can stem from the political parties, but not the other way around, which we would need today. My predecessors have said that the key is the structural deficit. Well, my colleagues in the Czech Fiscal Council told me that I should just use it as a new greeting, reduce structural deficit, reduce structural deficit. But without saying how, it doesn't mean much. So we have several proposals how to do it. I'm slightly optimistic because, in fact, almost half of the structural deficit is due to a change of the personal income tax several years ago. So if we change again personal income tax, we can reduce structural deficit down to a half, which is quite substantial. There may be some question about timing of the fiscal consolidation. Now, it seems we are entering a recession. Perhaps we are in it already. So is it the right time to do it, fiscal consolidation? It's right time to prepare it, obviously. If we do some fiscal consolidation, I guess we cannot do it sooner than in 2024. So by that time, hopefully, the recession will be over. So this should not be such a problem, although the Czech fiscal policy has been traditionally pro-cyclical. So it seems we are getting in it again. We have some, perhaps we can discuss it later, taxes which do not affect structural deficit, and that is the windfall tax, which is highly controversial. How it looks, it's not in line with optimal taxation, and maybe I can say that I'm not sure whether we are on the wrong side of the Laffer curve with 79% of marginal tax rate. That is something we have not seen in the Czech Republic, in the modern Czech Republic ever, I think. Okay, so maybe we'll leave the details. Let me just mention about the interaction of monetary and fiscal policy. Helena has already indicated that we have rather restrictive monetary policy today, with mortgage loans going down by 80% year on year, which is not a normal situation, I guess. And at the same time, we are in deficit. The budgets are in deficit. So should there be any coordination of monetary and fiscal policy? And if so, how? I do not have answer to this. So perhaps I will finish with a note on fiscal rules, which Czech Fiscal Council is concerned. Well, we have fiscal rules, but what happened is simply catastrophe. I do not mean about the deficits, but about the institution of the rules. It happened that at the very first moment when the rules were a real obstacle, were to be to limit the maneuvering space, the government just changed the rules. So this is the worst possibility for the rules as a kind of institution. And from the next year, in fact, there is some legal, perhaps we can have discussion on this. There is a legal debate what the rule really is. We don't know that. So maybe this is my conclusion.
The last panelist who will share his views is Jiří Valenta. He's Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Finance. So the floor is over.
All right. Well, very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you kindly for inviting me and being here. I think it seems appropriate that I'll have a short introduction about myself and shortly explain the position which I hold. I'm a political deputy minister for the Pirate Party at the Ministry of Finance. This is part of the coalition agreement which the current government runs on, is that we have the minister from one party and then there is a deputy minister from the other party. So I'm the only one from this panel who has not only the expert responsibility, but also the political responsibility. So I hope that I will say something both smart and something which be satisfactory even in the political sense of the word. Anyway, fiscal policies in the hard times. I think we all know that the mistakes were done, and the mistakes were done also on the on the side of the expenditure and also of the taxes. Taxes were either derogated at all as the tax for the transfer of the immovable property, or they were fairly decreased, and this continued also about this year. The government policy statement, well, which was written exactly a year ago, says that we should really look at the Maastricht criteria, and we should get grip of them. We are by far we are not there yet, and I think I'm very kindly to say that we welcome the debate of the National Economic Council and also the Fiscal Responsibility Council. And as it was said, the steps must be taken on both sides. To decrease the expenditure side and raise some taxes, or raise the incomes of the state. Sorry, got a little bit of a black window. Anyway, I would add to it that I think that there is also, as it was mentioned, I think that this crisis is also an opportunity. I think that we need a sort of a reformist or roadmap for reforms which are pro-growth reforms, because not only the taxes or the expenditures are viable to us. I think that there is still untapped potential amongst peoples in the workforce. We have still a low workforce of women. We have still people indebtedness to solve. We know that we have people in the shadow economy who are taking care of their debts, but how it is set up, they are not motivated to work more. So this is one thing which we'll need to look at. And I think that regarding the discussion about taxes, I think that it is really interesting to see the tax on the immovable properties. You know, this is something which is 100% for the municipalities, but the municipalities, only 8 or 9% of the municipalities are actually doing any sort of management of this tax. There is a certain flexibility given by the law. I'm not saying that the law was perfect, but inside the law, inside the act, were done some changes which allows to the municipalities to increase the tax with less political costs. This can be by smaller steps, and it can be also changed on the sort of which parcel it should take. So you can tax more. You know, it used to be the whole village has to have the same coefficient, but anyway, this is now better. So this immovable property tax, there is indeed some possibility, and I think that the tax exemptions and changes in the tax expenditures are certainly an untapped potential for the fiscal income. And yeah, I think I'll stop right there. I think we need just to wrap it up. I think we need a good roadmap, including expenditure side, income side, and also the structural reforms, which are very well prepared and very well discussed.
Thank you to all the panelists for their thoughts. Now, there's been a number of interesting themes. You've talked about pension reforms. You've talked about taxation reforms, monetary fiscal interactions, a very topical issue. There's been talk about fiscal rules and policy mistakes. I've got plenty of questions that I'd like to ask and to follow up on these issues. But I'll kind of try to shut up and open it up for a discussion. So if you have any sort of questions from the floor, as controversial or as pushy as they might be, feel free to ask. And I'll hand over the microphone. If not, I might kickstart the discussion and yeah, at any point, feel free to ask, because we'd like to tailor the discussion to whatever you guys are interested in. Okay, so are there any questions at this point? So, I mean, maybe we can start. Is there a question there? Okay, excellent. So let me just, if you'd like to maybe just introduce yourself and just say what institution you come from.
Hello, my name is Maranda Pantea, and I'm an assistant professor at Prague University of Economics and Business. I wanted to ask you if you would like to comment on the social impact of the measures that you propose, especially those regarding personal income tax. Thank you.
I presume this is a question for you, Jiri. Yeah, the social impacts of various kind of policy proposals, especially tax.
Well, thank you for the question. As I said, when I said that the mistakes were done, I think that the mistakes were done also in the derogation or in the decrease of the personal income tax, meaning the efficiency of it. If I would be preparing a reform to decrease the personal income tax, I would do it further different, and I think this is something which we can. Sorry, how to say it? Anyway, what is now proposed by the national NERV, this council of the government, there was proposed that to switch it up again, and I think this needs to be fairly discussed, because I'm not saying this should stay how it is, but what was proposed has to be carefully discussed and has to be looked at the social impacts, because I think we are not living in a time when we can allow for basically a social unrest, or we have to take care of the social stability first and foremost.
Let me just follow up on that. I mean, it seems like a very kind of political answer, but and I agree with you that ultimately we really have to look after the poor people. But I mean, there were massive tax cuts, and most of them kind of, as they always do, accumulated at the people at the top of the distribution. So are you saying there's kind of no room to increase taxes just to the level where they were 2 years ago? For the higher end of the income distribution, or potentially even think about some other solutions, introduce more progressivity in our tax system, because there's clearly not enough. There is some progressivity, but not in the tax rates themselves. So is it something that the governments are looking at? And if not, I mean, what's the plan? Like, I'd like to know what, there have been a lot of problems have been identified. So is there a specific plan?
Well, yes, I quite see. I can see where you're trying to take me, and I see the frown faces of the government councillors. I think that there is certainly a plan. I think that the plan is now well. Wrong answer. Sorry, there is not a plan yet in the place. I think that the plan is actually being now discussed. This is not that I think of it, but this is what I know for sure, is that we started quite a busy schedule of a coalition experts meeting, and we will discuss everything which was proposed by the council, and also we will discuss our own proposals. This is answer to Mr. Kubíček, that this is not that only the councillors or basically some neutral party are coming with, but also the parties, in the sense of political parties, are coming with their own ideas. And I think that the tax progressivity on the personal income tax, it was just shortly before the National Economic Council came with it. It was proposed by the policy of or the think tank of the Czech priorities, and I think this is something which is still being discussed, but I don't have the clear answer for it right now. But personally, off the record, I would see some space for it. But also, I think that this needs to be sort of really thought about, that, as we said, you know, as Mr. Libich said it well, there was a space that was created, the space was created in the higher income payers or taxpayers, and the lower income taxpayers, they got nothing. So I think this anomaly should be reformed quite fast.
I'm not sure we can guarantee this off the record thing, because, you know, there's a lot of witnesses here. But anyway, if there are any questions, I'd like to follow up with some possible solutions to kind of the long-term picture. And a few of you have actually mentioned the pension reform. So if you don't mind, let me just ask the panelists, if you had just 1 minute to outline your ideal pension reform. You can use a model that's in some other country, or, you know, what are the main ingredients, and maybe you can mention whether you're kind of optimistic that could kind of be pushed through the political agenda, given that, you know, we're losing time and the population's aging, so politically it becomes harder and harder. So can we just start from here? You know, one minute pension reform.
Yeah, thank you. It's tough to start, you know. Yet, like the ideal pension reforms, if I will not reflect the political and economic situation in Czech Republic, I would say that in my view as an economist, I would say like the individual pension account in which everybody will save during its working life, and there would be some would say the malus and bonus, so positive and negative distribution. Of course, we need to definitely distribute some part of our own private savings through the society. So in this case, I think, we can have some like individual pension system in which there would be at least partially redistributed through the, would say, entire or social sensitive population. But it would definitely means that is, you know, it's for society that have different maybe values, or it's more active and self-caring than I still see in the Czech Republic. Because what we are reflecting now in the Czech Republic and Czech society, that Czech society is asking for more wide and social, would say, caring model of our country and the state, and not really the right-wing society that will support the individual approach and individual activity. So I'm not sure if my idea is really like the likely solution for the Czech Republic, because, you know, we are just some of part of society are asking for very tight and very flexible state, but at the same time, if there is any problem like COVID crisis, energy crisis, everybody is asking for help. So these two things are not going together. So of course, as I'm saying, individual accounts for like pension system or for future pension, it's in my view the, like from economic point of view, the best solution. But if I'm looking on the society, especially in the Czech society, I do not see as something that it's possible and reliable to apply here.
Okay, you can show it to me. And I understand this is your favorite topic, and I understand why you're asking for it. But I think I already mentioned it. So I think, you know, depends on what is a pension reform, but kind of being realistic, I don't see it happening. And, you know, but you can still adjust parameters of the current pension system, and you can call it pension reform if that makes you happy. So maybe that's what you want. And maybe I listed only, you know, it's not all of the major parameters that I'm listing here, but I would start with the retirement age, which kind of, there's a system for extending it, and, there should be an is discussion kind of, how fast it can increase, but that's, I mean, one important parameter. The other is the indexation of pensions, where it's also kind of, so these two parameters is the first thing I would look at, and, if that's not enough for the sustainability of the system, then I would go to the other two parameters. So that's the social security contributions and the pensions themselves, especially the new pensions. So kind of, it's yeah. So these are the parameters that we work with, and we can see that there's some public and maybe even political debate on the scale of these parameters, and that's good to see.
It seems like we've got two different proposals now. One is kind of moving away from pay-as-you-go and thinking about individual accounts and accumulation. One is kind of more adjustments to the current system, mainly for political kind of reasons, to be able to push it through the system. Let's see what other panelists have to say.
Well, thank you. Well, I strongly believe that the pay-as-you-go system is essentially good. It's cheap, relatively. It has many advantages. So my reform would be a parametric reform of the pay-as-you-go system. And I would start with the retirement age. We know that, maybe you know that in the law, the retirement age is connected, it's linked to the expected life expectancy, although now it's switched off. But I would just renew the link between life expectancy and the retirement age. And if that's not enough, then we have other parameters to change. So I just would like to keep the pay-as-you-go system working, because I think it's a good idea. It worked. Now it's in a deficit, but it's not insurmountable. So this is my non-reform.
Well, I'll start with the joke. I'm not sure if if the panelist and the chairman is trying to forward my political career by these questions, but anyway, I'll try to I'll try to get some answers. I think that the pay-as-you-go system would work well if there wouldn't be so many changes within the past years. You know, if the increases would go just by the law, I think that this inertial stability would be quite all right. And but there were changes which were just parametrical, and they were rolling. This year 500, that year 5,000, that year 200 or something like that. So these extra valorizations or extra increases were really destabilizing the system. So I think this is sort of the first reform step, is not to do these changes so quickly. And then I think that there is one thing which needs to be addressed, and this is a sort of a Czech specialty, as far as I know from the discussions with international bodies as OECD, is that the Czech pensioners and Czech companies are actually working like that. You go to the pension when the conditions are met. You know, there is a very little number of people who are working above that age or above that limits, and then this creates some sort of, I would say, also shocks, or can be a room for improvement. How to increase the stability is not to see that age and these conditions as like, okay, this is where you go and you sort of must go. But I would see it as also you could go, but that's not something that society wants to get rid of you, or you can still continue in the job, and you can get bonuses and maluses, as it was said, if you are entering the pensions earlier or later.
Thank you. I'm I just a brief comment before I ask the audience for another question. I really have to disagree in terms of parametric changes. I mean, the extent of the aging population is such that there's just no way that, you know, moving the retirement age is or some of the other tinkering at the ages is going to do enough. But anyway, we can leave that. Let me. Well, I would certainly. I think we need to move away from pay as you go, and I mean, one of the ways we. Right. I mean, if you call idealistic, you know, if you feel like politically there's no way to push through it, so we're not even going to consider that. I think my view is, well, we've got to start with you know, knowing how unsustainable the system is, so we will calculate all the future liabilities. Well, in some ways, okay, we talked about fiscal rules, for example. I mean, how come that all the fiscal rules are still kind of specified in terms of, you know, the current budget deficit and the, you know, debt to GDP ratio, which everybody knows are basically meaningless. You know, one of the reasons is that they don't include future pension liabilities. Or they don't include things like, you know, guarantees for financial institutions. If you think about Ireland's, you know, public debt going from 25% to 120% within 2 years after the GFC, because they had to pay for the banks. I mean, you know, so we really have to switch our attention from kind of these short-term measures that are kind of meaningless to kind of longer-term measures like fiscal gap, and really talk about, you know, calculate the size of the fiscal hole. And then we can say, well, okay, was 20% missing? Well, how are we going to do that? And that's going to give us some ammunition to really say to the current pensioners, sorry, guys, but I mean, we can't increase pensions to you because the next generation is going to get 40 or 50% of what you're getting now. But anyway, I don't want to dominate. Let me open it up for questions. There's a question over there.
Okay, hello, my name is Anna Omlofova and I work at the Czech National Bank. And I have a question about one of the measures that was proposed by the National Economic Council of the government, and that's the introduction of tuition fees at universities. Because I've seen quite a lot of backlash to this proposal, especially when it comes to social mobility and the conditions of low-income students. And the argument that I've seen in favor of the tuition fees was that, for example, PhD students who receive ridiculously low amount of money could be better paid, or universities could be better financed. But then this measure would essentially be fiscally neutral and not helping with the structural deficit. So my question is, what's the logic behind it from the fiscal policy point of view, and not just the financing of universities?
Do you have anyone specific in mind who would like to ask the question? Was it the National Council here, the councillors?
We have another member of a Nation Economic Advisor.
Yeah. Dan Monik would be well placed to answer that because he was most involved in discussion. So, but I mean, you know, but also let me tell you that it is a long list. So you know, I didn't vote for this. You know, I'm not in favor, and many other people are not in favor of other measures. So this is a long list to choose from, and I think Dan Monik will explain best.
Have a go. We've got the education expert here.
But you know, you have to repeat the question because I was preparing my question at the time this one was asked. So. Okay. So note, if you really read what is being proposed, and my feeling is that almost nobody read what is written there. It said that first, the government should introduce the returnable loans for living of students because we have high inequality in the access to education already. Then there should be loans for tuition, both for private and public schools. And at a third step, it should be introduction of tuition fees. So in fact, the tuition fees can be introduced by this government because preparing the system of loans will take the remaining time the government has. So the question why tuition loans, why tuition fees, if they are backed by proper system of loans, as in the UK in the 90s, not the current system, then it will bring allow many students many young people who are not studying these days to the educational system, because this time they don't have money to live at the university, and it will bring additional money to the schools, and they will, if the government pays for that today, it will be coming back in the future as repayments. So as a present value, it's almost zero costs to the government. If you think long term, right? If you have to start thinking long term.
Let me just add, I think the debate about student fees is, it's unfortunate how low the level is. I mean, we've got systems in various countries, and when people think here, when people think about student fees, they always think, okay, this is kind of like a mortgage, and you're just gonna pay no matter what. You know, you have to pay the bank even if you're unemployed. You know, the Australian system, which was the inspiration for the British system. You can have these student fees in a very kind of socially sensitive way. So the student doesn't pay anything up front. The student only pays after graduation, and only if their income is at a certain level, fairly high level. So if your income is low, you never have to repay your student fees. Only if it's relatively high, you pay, and you only pay every month, you only pay a certain small proportion, 1, 2, 3% of your income. So the same way that your pension contribution is deducted from your income, the same way that your student loan would be deducted only if your income is sufficiently high. You're unemployed, you're not paying. Okay, so in this way, it's pretty uncontroversial that these are very sensitive. They're not going to discourage low-income students, from entering universities. And the positive aspect is that there's more money in the system so that you can provide higher quality, and you have incentives for students to also not to extend the studies beyond a reasonable level. But so yeah, we should really first talk about what's the best practice in terms of student fees, and then we can think about whether that's feasible. Anyway, are there any other questions in the audience for our panelists? We're done here.
Because I was really preparing a question. So if I say it simply, there are parametrical changes which can be introduced rather quickly. This is the usual approach in the Czech Republic for decades, and structural reforms. I have a list of many possible structural reforms which could improve the public finances in longer term. That's important. So if I could ask the question, which are the key structural reforms? Forget about pensions, okay? Because we discussed already. What are the other important structural reforms which could help public finances in longer term? And what are the reforms really under preparation? I'm looking at the right-hand side of the panel.
Okay, so we might start here just to reverse the order.
Well, yeah, it's up. Well, thank you for that question. So aside from the pension reforms, I think that we really need to fast forward sort of the educational reforms. I think there's still the primary care and school, like first and foremost, sorry, the care about the small kids, and really to allow the bigger workforce. This is, I think, one of the key elements. The second key element is the basically, judicial or the criminal code proceedings, and also the incarcerated people in the jails. This is something which I really welcomes, as it is a part of the system, and then also the people in the debt. I think this approach about the milostivé léto 1 and 2 was really good, and I think we certainly shall continue in it. And then I think that we need to really take care about basically the energy transition and sort of the reform about how we generate our energy, which we consume. You know, we see it now exactly even today. I'm actually fairly surprised how cold it is here, and I think that we are basically ill prepared. What is happening? The centralization is really high, or it's so I think I'll stop right here, and I can move to.
Just, Mika, I think you had in mind mainly specific proposals in regards to fiscal policy that can solve the fiscal problem. So maybe just for the other panelists, because obviously, I mean, you know, pre-child care and, you know, prisons, these are important questions, but I don't think they're going to really improve the fiscal outcome. So let's focus on.
If I may, I'll have to react on this because I think this is something really important. You know, if we look how much of the internal debt we have in the pre-child care, we know on the data, this is a data-driven evidence. We know that in the regions, sort of the regions in the north, we know that there are small kiddos between 2 and 3 years old are already signed up and the people are working. If this is not a fiscal responsibility step, I don't know what is it.
Are you suggesting that, you know, by providing better early education, you know, there's going to be investment into human capital and higher growth and higher tax revenues? Okay, that's a good point.
Thank you. Well, if I focus on fiscal policy, I must say I do not know where is the division line between structural changes and parametric changes. I mean, it's for me, it's a little bit blurred. So I am a big fan of parametric changes. I do not believe in revolutions. I think that if things change gradually, it's better. So from this point of view, just repair the personal income tax, somewhat repair value-added tax and corporate income tax, and it's done almost.
So what structural reform, right? So you ruled out pension reform because we discussed it and because it might be the obvious choice for many of us. It is one related area, which is healthcare and social care. So that's what I would name. And I'm not a particular expert on these, but really think that if you have some personal experience with the interaction of these two systems, that's, for example, where we need to do better, where, you know, it's not clear whether the person should receive healthcare or social care, and these are two different systems, two different ministries, and it does not work well. And also in terms of the health system, it seems to me that, you know, if I simplify it a lot, then that the Czech system is set up as the objective is to treat people, you know, to treat them, rather than the objective, you know, we should be healthy. And, you know, and so we do well on that current objective, but not necessarily on staying as healthy as possible. Thank you.
So I'm final. So thank you for being the final, because I can summarize the idea. Because if we are speaking about a problem in a structural deficit, we should definitely thinking about the structural changes. But doesn't mean that the changes in a structure of the budget cannot be parametrical one, because we can change the parameters in the structure items of the deficit. So we can change the main problems in a pension system, like the early pension that we are now facing. We can change the age in which we are going to pension, and more or less. And these are including the structural changes. But just start more generally. If we are speaking about the consolidation of structural deficit, there is, I would say, old gold rule of fiscal consolidation. And it's saying that you should do the consolidation 1/3 from incomes and 2/3 from our expenditures. In my view, this rule is not really applicable for the time of the current, as I said, perfect storm. We should reflect the economic situation in Czech Republic and overall the Europe, and we are looking to, like, not next year, but in a 3 or 5 year horizon. We should thinking what is possible to do. And in my view, and we did at Raiffeisen some research on that topic. In our view, it's possible to do the structural changes half and half, half from incomes and half from expenditures. And I view this is also the political feasible and also something that the economy is able to cope with that without the negative, strong negative impact on economic growth. So in the case of income, definitely I would agree with the reform of taxation in Czech Republic because we need it. Because we still have the tax system that's reflecting maybe 20th century, maybe 19th century, but not 21st century. And the tax reform is including, as we already mentioned, higher progressivity in the system. So definitely income taxes and higher progressivity in it. Next, the tax of consumption, not healthy consumption, should definitely help also. And this easily you get half of the structural deficit in it. So you are covering the half of the deficit by rising government income through the change in taxes. But then I think it's more complicated things, and this is the side of expenditures. In this case, I would say we need more private money in a pension system, more private money in healthcare system, and also just thinking what's the cost of running not only the central government, but also the municipal government. So there is the reform of the number, as we mentioned with Dan Munich in our session with the new economic advisor team. We need to thinking about the change, how our country is governed, the local government, the number of towns, a number of municipalities that are not able to draw efficiently the EU money because they are too small. So these are the possibility how to reduce the government expenditures, in my view. And of course, I'm also a fan of the digitalization. So let's go to revise the government agenda and what we can reduce or even eliminate thanks to digitalization. But of course, I'm the realist, so I know that into digitalization you need to invest first, and then you get the fruits. But we need to do that.
Okay, excellent. I'm afraid we're out of time. I was really glad to hear the healthcare system being mentioned, because unlike the pension system, where we get some good examples globally of, you know, where in which direction the reform could be headed, for healthcare, basically nobody has a clue what to do, and you know, there's not a single country that would have the healthcare long-term healthcare spending under control. But unfortunately, we'll have to wind up here. Let me thank the panelists for their views and for a really interesting discussion, and you for your active participation. I really hope that we'll see some improvements in the kind of long-term position of public finances soon. I'm not very optimistic, but I'd like to be surprised. And you know, we shouldn't leave the mess we've created for the young generations and for the future generations. We should clean it up. So let's wish ourselves best of luck, and thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and yeah, I hope to see you here and you know, at the next edition of the conference. And I would like to thank the organizers for a really great conference. I think they've done an excellent job. So please join me in thanking them. Okay.
And now very few pieces of information logistically. Jakub will share with you about lunch, but let me also thank you those who prepared this panel. They are behind, invisible, but this is Barbara Gebicka and Martin Macháček who are sitting there, who spent a while to prepare it and to put it together. Thanks for that. And also thanks to National Fiscal Council for supporting our lunch.
I have short organizing information. The lunch will be served at the academic club, which is from your view on the left, and in the third floor. Unfortunately, the lift is out of order, so please use the stairs, which are very close to the enter to the lift. After the parallel sessions, we will close the conference at the glass of wine. The glass of wine will be also served at the academic club at the same place where the lunch will be served. And my final remark is please contribute to our environment, and at the end of the conference, after the glass of wine, please return your plastic badges at the conference desk, because we will recycle them for the next biennial conference, which will be held in 2024. Thank you, and enjoy your meal.
Jo. Mohu i s dcerou?
Můžete i s dcerou, samozřejmě. Ano. No. Jo.
Ale jdeme až po Slávě
Ne, to řešíte.
Já jsem došla k tomu. Ale to docela často.
Jo. Jo, to není důležitý. Já mám jako starší 5letá dcera moje, takže my zatím vidíme jako nezajímavé věci, ale jestli tam tak už možná je jako... No, ale už jako... No, že to člověk už může víc žít, než je jako zpívat. Někdo slovy, někdo pohybem, no. A jsi říkali při přednášení, nebo ty taky přednášíš, ne? No.
Když jsi říkal, že je fotografie.
No, povinnosti.
Díky moc.
Díky na noc.
Díky moc. Já ten takhle holkám tady dávám dohromady, aby jsme to tady pak nenechali. Jo. Nějaký vypneme radši, aby jsme... To je klasika, jo. Prostě to nejdůležitější věc je tak malý, že to není vidět. A tady tam nějaká šipka směřuje. Je to tam.